Peter's mother, Briggity, who was mending by the table, had risen and was now examining the child with curiosity from head to toe. She said, "I don't know, Mother, whether the uncle himself came with her or not. It's not likely. The child may be mistaken." But Heidi looked straight at the woman and said, "I know very well who wrapped me up in the coverlet and brought me down on the sled. It was my grandfather." "Then there must be something in what Peter said last summer about the uncle, although we thought he was not right," said the grandmother. "Who could really have believed that such a thing was possible? I thought the child wouldn't live there 3 weeks. How does she look, Briggity?" Briggity had studied her so thoroughly in the meantime that she could well describe her appearance. "She has a delicate form like Adelheid," she replied, "but she has black eyes and curly hair like Tobias, and also like the old man up there. I believe she looks like both of them." Meanwhile, Heidi was not idle. She had looked around and noticed everything. Now she said, "See, grandmother? There's a shutter that keeps swinging back and forth. My grandfather would drive a nail at once to hold it fast. It will break a pane of glass. See, see?" "Oh, you good child," said the grandmother. "I cannot see it, but I can hear it, and much more besides the shutter. Everything creaks and rattles when the wind blows, and it comes in everywhere. Everything is loose, and often in the night, when both the others are asleep, I'm so anxious and afraid lest the whole house should tumble down over our heads and kill us all three. And there's no man to mend anything about the hut, for Peter doesn't know how." "But can't you see how the shutter swings, grandmother? See, there it goes again. There. And Heidi pointed with her finger directly toward the place. "Ah, child, I can see nothing at all, nothing at all." "The shutter or anything else," said the grandmother mournfully. "But if I go out and open the shutter wide so that it will be quite light, can you see then, grandmother?" No, not even then. No one can make it light for me again. But if you go out on the white snow, then it will surely be light for you. Just come with me, grandmother. I will show you." Heidi took the grandmother by the hand to lead her out, for she was beginning to be distressed because it did not seem light anywhere to the old woman. "Let me sit still, you good child. It would be dark for me even in the snow and in the light. My eyes cannot see." "But then in the summertime, grandmother," said Heidi, still anxiously seeking some way out of the difficulty. "You know, when the sun comes down quite hot and says good night to the mountain, and they shine fiery red, and all the yellow flowers glisten, then it will be light to you, won't it?" "Ah, child, I can never see them any more. The fiery mountains and the golden flowers above us will never more be bright to me on earth. Never more." Then Heidi burst into loud weeping. Full of distress, she kept sobbing, "Who can make it light for you? Who can make it light again for you? Can no one? Can no one at all?" The grandmother tried to comfort the child, but she did not succeed. Heidi hardly ever cried, but when she once began, it was almost impossible for her to recover from her grief. The grandmother had tried every means to soothe the child, for it went to her heart to have her sob so pitifully. Finally she said, "Come here, dear Heidi, come here. I want to tell you something. When a person cannot see, it is so pleasant to hear a friendly word, and I'd like to hear you talk. Come, sit down near me and tell me what you do up there and what your grandfather does. I used to know him well, but for many years I have heard nothing about him except through Peter, and Peter doesn't say much." Then a new idea came to Heidi's mind. She quickly wiped away her tears and said comfortingly, "Just wait, grandmother. I will tell my grandfather all about it, and he will make it light for you again, and he will fix the hut so that it won't tumble down. He can make everything all right." The grandmother remained silent. Then Heidi began with great liveliness to tell her about her life with her grandfather and the days she spent in the pasture, about her present life in the winter, and about her grandfather, what he made out of wood, benches and stools and lovely cribs to put hay in for Schwandley and Barley, and a large new water tub for bathing in summer, and a new milk bowl and spoon, and Heidi grew still more eager in describing the beautiful things which were made out of a piece of wood, and how she stayed near her grandfather and watched him, and how quickly he did everything. The grandmother listened with great interest, and from time to time interrupted her with, Did you hear that, Brigady? Did you hear what she says of the uncle? And suddenly the story was interrupted by a great thumping at the door, and in stamped Peter. The boy immediately stood still and opened his round eyes wide in astonishment at the sight of Heidi, and then a good-natured grin spread over his face as she said, "Good afternoon, Peter." "Is it possible that he has already come home from school?" exclaimed the grandmother in surprise. "No afternoon for many a year has passed so quickly. Good afternoon, Peter. How did you get on with the reading?" "Just the same," answered Peter. "Dear, dear," said the grandmother with a little sigh. "I thought there might be a change. Think. You'll be 12 years old next February." "Why should there be a change, grandmother?" asked Heidi, at once with interest. "I only thought he might be able to learn something," said the grandmother. "Learn to read, I mean. Up there on the shelf I have an old prayer book with beautiful hymns in it which I have not heard for so long that I cannot remember them. So I thought, Peterly, if he could only learn, he perhaps would be able to read some of the verses to me. I think I must get a light. It is already quite dark," said Peter's mother, who had been busy mending the jacket all the while. "The afternoon is gone before I was aware of it, either." Then Heidi jumped up from her chair, quickly reached out her hand, and said, "Good night, grandmother. I must go home right away if it's growing dark." And Peter and his mother shook hands with her, one after another, and accompanied her to the door. But the grandmother called out anxiously, "Wait, wait, Heidi, you must not go alone. Peter must go with you. Do you hear? And take care of the child, Peterly. Don't let her fall down, and don't let her stand still, for she might freeze. Do you hear? And has she a good thick scarf around her neck?" "I haven't any scarf at all, but I shall not freeze," Heidi called back. Then she went out the door and slipped away so quickly that Peter could hardly follow her. But the grandmother called anxiously, "Run after her, Brigady, run! The child will be frozen out in the night like this. Take my shawl, run quickly." Brigady obeyed, but the children had gone only a few steps up the mountain when they saw the grandfather coming down, and in a minute he was with them. "Very good, Heidi," said he. "You have kept your word." He wrapped the coverlet around the child once more, took her up in his arms, and climbed up the mountain. Brigady saw this and then went back into the hut with Peter and told the grandmother in great surprise all about it. The grandmother also was surprised and kept saying, "Oh, God be praised and thanked that he's so good to her. God be praised and thanked. If he will only let her come to see me again, for the child did me so much good. What a kind heart she has. How amusingly she talks." And until she went to bed she kept repeating, "If she will only come again. Now there's something still left in the world to give me pleasure." Brigady agreed with her every time, and Peter nodded his head approvingly and stretched his mouth wide with delight, saying, "It's no surprise to me." Meanwhile, Heidi, wrapped in her bag, had much to say to the grandfather, but as her voice did not sound clearly through the eightfold wrap, he could not understand a word she said. "Wait a while until we get home, then tell me about it." As soon as he reached the hut and taken off Heidi's wrap, she said, "Grandfather, tomorrow we must take a hammer and big nails and fasten the shutter on grandmother's house and drive a good many more nails, for everything creaks and rattles there." "We must? We must do so? Who told you that?" asked the grandfather. "Nobody told me so. I knew it without," replied Heidi. "For everything is loose, and it makes the grandmother anxious and afraid when the wind blows, and she can't sleep. She thinks, now everything will fall down on our heads, and nobody can make it light any more for the grandmother. She doesn't know how anyone can. But you can, surely, grandfather. Only think how sad it is for her to always be in the dark, and nobody can help her but you. Tomorrow we will go, won't we, grandfather?" Heidi clung to her grandfather and looked up at him with undoubting confidence. The old man gazed at the child for a little while and then said, "Yes, Heidi, we will make everything fast at the grandmother's hut, so that there will be no more rattling. Tomorrow we will do so." Then the child jumped for joy all around the room and cried, "Tomorrow we will do it! Tomorrow we will do it! Tomorrow we will do it!" And the grandfather kept his word. The following afternoon they took the same ride on the sled. The old man set the child down before the door and said, "Now go in, and when it is night, come back." Then he laid the bag on the sled and went around the house. Scarcely had Heidi opened the door and run into the room when the grandmother called out from her corner, "Here comes the child! It is the child!" She dropped her thread and stopped the wheel for joy and held out both hands. Heidi immediately pushed the little low chair quite near, sat down on it, and had a great many more things to tell her and to ask her. But suddenly there was a heavy pounding on the house. It startled the grandmother so that she nearly upset the spinning wheel and trembled, crying out, "Oh, oh, oh, dear me! It has come at last! The hut is all tumbling to pieces!" But Heidi held her fast by the arm and said comfortingly, "No, no, grandmother, don't be afraid. It is grandfather with his hammer. He is going to mend everything so that you won't be worried and afraid any longer." "Oh, is it possible? Is such a thing possible? So the dear Lord has not entirely forgotten us," exclaimed the grandmother. "Did you hear that, Briggity? Did you hear what it is? It is really a hammer. Go out, Briggity. Go out, and if it is the uncle, tell him he must come in a moment and let me thank him." Briggity went out. The uncle was just driving new fastenings into the wall. Briggity went toward him and said, "I wish you good afternoon, Uncle, and so does my mother. And I want to thank you for doing us such a service, and so does my mother indoors. Surely no one else would do such a thing for us. And we want to thank you for surely—" "That will do," interrupted the old man. "What you think of the uncle I already know. Just go back into the house. I can find out myself what needs to be done." Briggity at once obeyed, for the uncle had a way which people did not usually oppose. He pounded and hammered all around the hut. Then he climbed the narrow little staircase up onto the roof and kept on hammering until he had driven the last nail he had brought with him. Meanwhile, it had begun to grow dark, and he had hardly come down and drawn his sled from behind the goat shed when Heidi stepped out from the door. The grandfather wrapped her up in his arms and carried her as on the previous day, drawing the sled after him. And thus the winter passed. After many long years, a joy had come into the blind grandmother's dreary life, and her days were no more long and dark, for now she always had something pleasant to look forward to. From early morning she listened for the tripping footstep, and when the door opened and the child actually came dancing in, then she always exclaimed joyfully, "God be praised! She has come again!" Heidi would sit down by her side and prattle and talk merrily about everything she knew. It made the time pass so quickly that the grandmother did not notice it, and not once did she ask as formerly, "Briggity, is the day nearly over?" Every time that Heidi closed the door behind her, the grandmother would say, "How short the afternoon has been, hasn't it, Briggity?" And Briggity would reply, "To be sure, it seems to me we have hardly put away the dinner plates." And the grandmother would say again, "If only the good Lord will preserve the child for me, and keep the uncle kind. Does she look well, Briggity?" And every time Briggity would answer, "She looks like a rosy apple." Heidi had also great fondness for the old grandmother, and whenever it came to her mind that no one, not even her grandfather, could make it light for her again, a great feeling of sorrow came over her. But the grandmother assured her that she suffered least when she was with her. So Heidi came down on the sled every fine winter's day. The grandfather, without making any objection, brought her, always carrying his hammer and other things, and he spent many an afternoon working over Peter's hut. It had a good result. There was no more creaking and rattling, and the grandmother said she could never forget the uncle, for she had not been able to sleep well for many a long winter. Quickly passed the winter, and still more quickly the merry summer following, and the new winter was already drawing to an end. Heidi was as happy and contented as the birds of the air, and rejoiced more and more every day in the approaching spring, when the warm south wind would blow through the fir trees and drive away the snow. Then the bright sunshine could call forth the blue and yellow flowers, and the days in the pasture would come again, days which to Heidi brought the greatest pleasure that earth could give. Heidi was now in her 8th year. She had learned all sorts of handiwork from her grandfather. She could go round with the goats as if she were one of them, and Schwandly and Barely followed her like trusty dogs. bleating loudly for joy if they merely heard her voice. This winter, Peter had already brought word twice from the schoolteacher in Derfley that the uncle ought to send the child living with him to school, for she was more than old enough and should have gone the winter before. The uncle had sent word back both times that if the schoolteacher wanted anything of him, he would find him at home, and that he would not send the child to school. This message Peter had faithfully delivered. When the March sun had melted the snow on the slopes, and the snowdrops were in bloom everywhere in the valley, when the fir trees on the arm had shaken off their burden of snow, and their branches again waved merrily, then Heidi in her delight kept running back and forth from the house to the goat shed, and from the goat shed to the fir trees, and then into the hut to her grandfather to tell him how much larger the piece of green ground had grown under the trees. Then she would immediately run back to look again, for she could not wait until everything should be green once more, and the lovely summer with its leaves and bloom returned to the mountain. One sunny March morning, when Heidi was running back and forth in this way and was jumping over the door-sill for about the 10th time, she nearly fell backward into the house from fright, for suddenly there appeared before her an old man all in black, who looked at her very earnestly. And when he saw how startled she was, he said kindly, "You must not be afraid of me. I love children. Give me your hand. You must be Heidi. Where is your grandfather?" "He's sitting at the table carving round spoons out of wood," replied Heidi, opening the door. It was the old pastor from Derfley, who had known the uncle well years before, when he still lived in the valley and was one of his neighbors. He stepped into the hut, went up to the old man, who was bending over his wood carving, and said, "Good morning, neighbor." The grandfather looked up in surprise. The next instant he arose and replied, "Good morning, pastor." Then he offered him his stool and said, "If the pastor does not object to a wooden seat, here is one." The pastor sat down. After a moment he said, "I have not seen you for a long time, neighbor." "Nor have I seen you, pastor," was the answer. "I've come today to talk about something with you. I think you already know what the matter is which I'm going to speak about, and I want to hear what you plan to do." The pastor remained silent and looked at the child, who was standing in the doorway and closely watching the stranger. "Heidi, go out to the goats," said the grandfather. "You may take a little salt along and stay with them until I come." Heidi immediately disappeared. "The child should have been sent to school a year ago, and she certainly ought to have gone this winter," said the pastor. "The teacher has sent you word about it, but you have made no fitting reply. What do you intend to do with her, neighbor?" "I do not intend to send her to school," was the answer. The pastor looked in surprise at the old man as he sat with folded arms on his bench and looked very decided. "What are you going to make of the child?" then asked the pastor. "Nothing. She grows and thrives with the goats and the birds. She's well enough with them, and she learns no harm from them." "But the child is neither a goat nor a bird. She is a human being. If she learns no harm from such companions, neither does she learn anything else. She ought to learn something, and the time for it has arrived. I have come to tell you now, neighbor, so that you may be able to think it over and make your plans during the summer. This is the last winter that the child can spend without teaching. Next winter she must go to school, and every day." "I shall not do it, pastor," said the old man decidedly. "Do you really suppose, then, that there is no means of bringing you to terms if you will go on so obstinately in your unreasonable behavior?" said the pastor somewhat warmly. "You have been about the world a great deal, and have had an opportunity to see and learn much, and I should give you credit for better sense, neighbor." "Indeed," said the old man, and his voice showed that he was no longer so perfectly calm in his mind. "And does the pastor suppose that I would really send a delicate child next winter on icy mornings through storm and snow down the mountain a 2 hours' journey, and let her come back at night when it often blusters and rages, so that any one of us would be lost in the wind and snow, and she only a little child? Possibly the pastor can recall her mother, Adelheid. She used to walk in her sleep and have ill turns. Shall the child, too, be made to suffer from such a struggle? Just let anyone come and try to force me. I will go into every court with her, and then we shall see who is going to force me." "You are quite right, neighbor," said the pastor with friendliness. "It would not be possible to send the child from here to school, and I can see that she is dear to you. For her sake, do what you ought to have done long ago. Come down into Durfley and live once more with human beings. What kind of life is this up here, alone and bitter toward God and man? If anything should happen to you up here, who would help you? I cannot understand in the least why you are not half frozen all winter long in your hut, and how can the delicate child endure it? Child is young blood and good shelter, that I can assure you, pastor. Moreover, I know where there is wood, and also when it is good time to get it. The pastor ought to look into my shed. There's enough there so that the fire in my hut never goes out all winter long. It is not for me to go down into the valley, as the pastor suggests. The people down there despise me, and I despise them. So it is better for both that we remain apart." "No, no, it is not good for you. I know what the trouble is," the pastor said earnestly. "As for the people despising you down in the valley, it is not so bad, believe me, neighbor. Seek to make peace with your God. Ask for his pardon if you've done anything wrong, and then come and see how differently the people regard you, and how well it can still be with you." The pastor rose, held out his hand to the old man, and said again with heartiness, "I count on it, neighbor, that next winter you are to come down with us, for we are good old friends. I should feel very sorry if you had to be forced. Give me your hand on it, that you will come down and live among us again, at peace with God and man." The uncle gave his hand to the pastor, but said firmly and decidedly, "The pastor means well toward me, but I cannot do what he expects. That I tell him surely and finally. I shall not send the child, neither shall I come down myself." "Then God help you," said the pastor, and went sadly out of the hut and down the mountain. The uncle was out of sorts. In the afternoon, when Heidi said, "Now, let's go to the grandmother's," he replied shortly, "Not today." He did not speak again all day, and on the following morning, when Heidi asked, "Are we going to the grandmother's today?" he said shortly and merely, "We shall see." Before the bowls had been put away after dinner, another visitor came to the door. It was Aunt Didi. She had on her head a fine hat with a feather in it, and a dress which swept up everything on the floor, and in the hut lay all sorts of things that would not improve a dress. The uncle looked at her from top to toe, and said not a word. But Aunt Didi had a very friendly speech in her mind, for she immediately began to praise him by saying that Heidi was looking so well that she hardly recognized her, and that it was plain to see that she had not fared ill with her grandfather. She had really always intended to take her away again, for she understood very well that the little one must be a trouble to him, but never any time before had she been able to find a place for her. But night and day she had wondered how she could provide for the child, and today she had come because she had suddenly heard of something which would be such good luck to Heidi that she could hardly believe it. She had gone at once to see about the matter, and now she could say it was as good as settled, and not 1 in 100,000 was so fortunate as Heidi. Some very wealthy relatives of my mistress, who live in almost the finest house in all Frankfurt, have an only daughter who is obliged to sit all the day in a wheelchair because she is lame and not well in other ways. So she is almost always alone, and obliged to study alone with a teacher, which is very dull for her. And besides, she would like to have a playmate in the house. This had been spoken about at her employer's house, and her mistress, who felt very great sympathy for the little invalid, was anxious to find such a companion as the housekeeper described.